Hello everyone, good afternoon. I, Rita, on behalf of FSR Global, welcome you all to our online debate on interoperability. So moving ahead, I would like to invite Shweta to take you all forward for this session.
Thank you, Amrita. A very good morning and good afternoon to all our panelists and experts joining us on today's debate. It's a very interesting debate that we're bringing to you as part of the EU-India Regulatory Workshop series that we have been conducting for 6 years now. It's under the EU-India Clean Energy Climate Partnership. And in today's topic, it's going to be on a slightly new universe, which merges with the power sector, which is on the universe of interoperability. So we have a stellar lineup of experts bringing in different perspectives, but Parul will get into that in a bit. So we hope you enjoy the series and particularly today's debate. Do stay tuned. For those of us who want a recording of this, we also have it on YouTube live. So you can all back and check on the different concepts and things that we're discussing in today's debate. So for probably Parul, you can just cover for Bartosz and then continue to the next leg, because for some reason, the audios from two different applications are just mixing. That's something for us to learn after this.
Well, I suppose a good start for a webinar on interoperability. Hello, good evening, good morning to all present. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Parul Bakshi and I work as a research fellow with FSR Global. A very warm welcome. And on behalf of Bartosz, who unfortunately was not able to join in, he did send a recorded video. We'll probably try and play it later if we can. But I welcome you on his behalf as well and apologize that he couldn't join us in real time for this event. However, FSR Global and EUCECP has been conducting this regulatory workshop series. We're in the 6th cycle now, which means it's the 6th year that we're having this. And today the topic is on interoperability. And it is my pleasure to briefly introduce you to all the speakers of the day. And Bartosz did make a comment in the remarks that he sent, saying that it would be nearly impossible to cover the huge aspect of interoperability. So I agree with him there. And keeping that in mind, let me start with the introduction. So we have with us Andre, who's the co-chair of the Digitization and Energy Task Force of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Welcome. We have Laura, who's the former chair of the UK government's Energy Digitalization Task Force. You've already met Shweta, who's also the executive director of FSR Global. We have with us Vimal, who's the vice president and chair of the Standardization Board, International Electrotechnical Commission. We also have with us Sridhar, CEO and founder of Blaze Automation. So as you can see, we've tried to bring in almost all stakeholders that we could. And without further ado, I give the floor to Andre to start with his insights.
Thank you very much, Parul. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here today. And before starting, just want to congratulate the FSR Global team for the event, everything that you are doing, and especially for the report on interoperability. It's really a very important document, and it covers a lot of very important challenges and obviously opportunities that we have. Let me start from the wider, let's say, context, and then we can bring it to a more specific things. And I'm sure my panelists my fellow panelists will also discuss this in depth. So, of course, as we all know, basically, I'm preaching to the choir a bit now, but the twin transition, so basically this transition that is both on the energy, let's say, sector side as well as the digital side, and the intertwining between these two sectors is critical nowadays. We cannot think about, let's say, this transition to being successful or having the right pace in order to get to net zero without having a digital structure, foundation, backbone, whatever we want to call it. We need to build on top of the digital technologies and platforms that we have in order to integrate better intermittent, let's say, technologies, to align the demand with this intermittent, let's say, generation technologies, to bring system efficiency, to increase energy efficiency individually and at community level, and so on and so forth. Numerous advantages and benefits. I'm sure we will allude into some of them later on. What is great about the twin transition and about actually the digital aspect of it is that it's not a controversial topic. We may see a lot of scenarios these days, and people, are choosing one option to go for the, their energy systems, or to choose one technology, or to have some ideas on how to address this net zero, let's say, pathway in front of us, domestically and regionally, of course. But no one disagrees with the need and the opportunity that digital technologies are bringing to the table. It's not a casus belli. And because of that, because it is not a controversial topic, and it's one of the very few topics that are not controversial in this energy transition debates, I think it's a very good foundation to start building upon, and to basically add and bring together stakeholders from all regions and from all, let's say, layers of the society together. And we are doing that because we are seeing through this twin transition let's say, a transition from a one-way energy flow to a two-way energy and data flow. So it's not only energy that is flowing in between, let's say, stakeholders of energy systems, between consumers or prosumers these days and the system. It's a two-way street of both energy, prosumers I was talking about, but also data that is flowing all over this ecosystems. Now, I've started with the good parts, but obviously there are parts that are not as good, and probably the pace of this transformation is probably not the one that we need. And that is for a number of reasons, a combination of factors, from awareness of some policymakers, awareness even at business level, and even at consumers level. So we can work a bit on that. Funding is another, let's say, big a topic, not necessarily because there are not funds for that, but they're not necessarily channeled where we need that. But apart from this, let's say, two let's say, main topics, adoption pace that is not high enough and funding that is not well channeled, I think there are two important topics that we need to discuss about, and that's actually the topic of today. Interoperability, so how standards in using different technologies and different platforms would bring system efficiency and would bring a lean, let's say, functioning of the energy system of today and tomorrow, and also how important data is, and how important the governance of data is in order to progress in this regard. Because models, projections, and even the transition itself is as good as the data that we have, and the data that we are feeding the models and the projections that we have. On the both interoperability and data standards are very important, and I'm sure we will talk about that, because in this way we can maximize benefits for all stakeholders, from consumers to businesses that are involved in that, and society at large. But we can also minimize, let's say, some of the risks that some of the stakeholders are perceiving, like data privacy, like cybersecurity on the consumer side, but also on the business side, the idea that through standardization, they are basically losing some of the ecosystems that they hardly built, which is, to some extent true, but it's something that doesn't need to, represent a bottleneck in this energy transition or, twin transition process. I'll stop here for the moment. I'm sure that we will discuss about all these things in depth. But once again, thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to the other panelists' views. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I think, Laura, you have some slides to share. So I request you to, yes, we can, if you can make it presentation mode, please.
I don't know whether they've come through. Let me put them on slideshow.
Yes.
So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and thank you all so much for the great leadership that you're taking on these issues and all the conversations we've had over the period of time. So thank you. And actually, I think also really pleased to follow Andrea, who's taken such a leadership role here. Actually, I think we're looking at both the opportunities of being the smartest energy system, but also ensuring that we're keeping the lights on, because actually digitalization isn't really just a nice to have, and it's not just a modernization, it is actually about the security of your system going forward. Now, I don't want to put the regulator right here in the middle of this, but actually, this is what's happening to regulation as it moves forward in the energy system. It used to be a simple job. It was an electron moving from one place to another with controlled pricing, etc. We are now talking about a very much more complex system. And in the UK, I say this because there are 400 people who run the energy sector in the UK, and they all know each other's golf handicap. And that's fantastic. But we are now moving to 100 million actions and assets on the system going forward. So as I say, interoperability, multiple assets and multiple variants, this interoperability is absolutely crucial. So talking about these 400 to 100 million actions and assets, we're talking about a system that's going to require multiple and changing preferences, interactions between third parties. It's not going to be a command and control environment. Very much what Andrea says about data is really important. More dynamic bi-directional system needs. And all of these things, if we think that we're going to be able to do this in the way that we did it in the past, I think regulators and ministers' policy is going to have some real problems. So again, I'm really trying to stress both the challenge forward, but also the urgency to put these mechanisms in place. And so our Energy, Digitalization and Data Task Force really looked at these four key, on the left-hand side, the dynamic digital markets, digitalization, AI and algorithms, but very important is open data tools and data openness. We need to have visibility of assets. And what this delivers you actually is a much, much more robust, actually, regulatory regime, because you're going to have the visibility and the understanding of how the system is developing. If what you as a regulator do is, in many ways, embed digitalization, visibility, and openness at the heart of your regulation. I think the regulatory leadership is important. All your regs should look at digitalization as one of the key components and ensure that what it's doing is delivering to the end, to the objectives that you have for the whole system. And it needs to be embedded. It cannot be a silo living in its own digital world. It has to be integrated. So with the Energy Digitalization Task Force, we really talked about really one very, very core piece of infrastructure, of data infrastructure, which is the data sharing infrastructure. It has been called the digital spine. There's some great work going on with the IEA and many people around the world to actually try and create a global set of standards for interoperability that in many ways actually offers a huge opportunity for us all, because it means that it will not be, and very important about the digital spine concept, it mustn't be captured by corporates, it must have open standards, and it must be universally accessible. But part of that data sharing infrastructure, you do need to have customer control and consent. There does need to be automated asset registration. So when you're talking about PVs, when you're talking about EVs, these need to be integrated on the system. The load of EVs by 2035 in the UK will be the equivalent of 3 nuclear power stations. That is where your distributed asset base is going to have, as both, it can either be a negative on your system or it can be a huge positive. And the last piece is the flexibility exchange, which is looking at markets so that you're ensuring that the markets are delivering you the flexibility you need. And I would really stress, and I think Andrea touched on this, but I would really stress, there is nothing new here. What is new is to the energy sector that I love and adore, but is pretty old-fashioned. And what we have is we have engineers meeting digital natives, and the two find it very difficult to communicate. We don't have the digital skills within the energy sector, but there is not one piece of so-called digital development that is needed that hasn't been in these sectors for possibly 20 years. So I would urge regulators and operators to get out there, meet some new people from different sectors, and actually understand how this can be done in a safe way that is regulated, that is in many ways fair for all, and delivers us a really exciting interoperability platform. So I look forward to all the questions, and thank you again for inviting me along.
Thank you, Laura. Shweta, over to you. Would you share your screen?
Thank you, Parul. Going after Laura is challenging, but she's hitting on many of the things. So let me try to do it justice by following. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So I think I'm going to continue in the stride of what Laura just presented, but only a little bit taking it into a more narrow scope. So most of the things that I'm presenting here is from the recent paper that Parul and I had authored, which is focusing on open standards, particularly in home connected devices. So it's a small part of the value chain, but nonetheless an emerging space, and how we can sort of get ahead of the curve and already start to nudge things in the right direction. So the entire paper and the following slides is bringing to light some of these findings that we explored while writing this paper. So first and foremost, I think the universe of interoperability is too vast. It would take us at least a month of different series to just discuss the different aspects. But what you see on your left is the SGAM framework, which is a three-dimensional model, which is usually referred to look at how the power sector interacts with the communication and the IT layers, and the impact that it has on other businesses and functions at large. So you can see that it goes through the entire value of the power sector. But for today's focus, we will focus more on the last part of the value chain, which is the end consumer. So someone did ask before we started how we sort of define interoperability. So we borrowed this definition of narrow and broad interoperability to simplify this three-dimensional model that we have. Narrow interoperability simply focuses on at the device level and how at a technical system level they're able to communicate. So also focusing on the ICT aspects of interoperability. Whereas broad interoperability really looks at how different organizations interact with each other to enable this environment. So we are going to focus more a little bit on narrow interoperability. So just to bring that into a 2D view, we are looking at the house or the consumer premise as the first layer of the network. Then we're looking at the distribution utility, which is the second layer, and then multiple distribution utilities connecting to the vast grid that we have as the third layer. Whereas our paper is focused as a starter on the HAN network, and then subsequently we would love to expand our research on the FAN and the WAN networks. I see already we have a question on things in the other networks, so hopefully we'll be able to pick that up in the Q&A. So just to look at what exactly is at a consumer premises, we have tried to classify all of the different devices that's there in an average home, which could be used. And how it can interact with the power sector through these different types. I'm not going to get into the detail. We will share a link of the paper where you can read about it. But just to know that there are certain devices which must function when it must, while there are other devices where the consumer has more flexibility in when they can operate it, and certain devices purely because of the function of what they do, once it starts, it cannot be interrupted. But all of this is great if I have about 10 different appliances in my house. The bigger question is, are these devices interoperable? And is the consumer able to seamlessly communicate and make them communicate with each other, which is the bigger challenge as we discovered. So And the simplest and the cleanest solution for that is to bring in standards and protocols which could be applied to these different consumer appliances, so that the consumer is not burdened and can easily sort of interact with these devices and they talk to each other. Now, firstly, you must be wondering why we need protocols and standards. It's very simple. Having standards enables creativity and innovation, and particularly also to the emergence of uniqueness within the product itself. So that means not focusing our efforts on something that's common to all, which could be addressed by open standards, whereas allows for more freedom and creativity and other things which are more proprietary. They're at a system level, sort of being more efficient and saving on costs. A simple bifurcation between what is a protocol and a standard. A protocol is usually a set of rules that two or more parties agree to use, whereas a standard is something which is more formalized. We have someone from IEC speaking next, so they are one of the agencies which authorizes standards. So if standards is usually what is adopted and is the norm and is sort of set till it's upgraded or changed going in time. So when we look at devices, as we see that there is a hardware layer and a software side to many devices, it must be overwhelming to understand where exactly is the standardization effort taking place. So we try to simplify it and say that most of the standardization in today's time is focused in the information layer, which is the top two bricks that you see in this model here. Whereas in the hardware or the operational layers, it is fairly standardized from many decades. You see some of these usual suspects in terms of Bluetooth. All of us are aware, all our smartphones have. We're all now well versed with 4G, 5G. These are all standards that have been accepted, tried and tested over the long time. Whereas where the innovation is happening right now is in the top two layers, which is transport and how different applications can be loaded onto this. So that's more of how the data is transmitted and used for a meaningful purpose that's being explored right now. Again, as to if you must be wondering why we need to standardize, is business as usual great? Let me just take you into our households and try to see how two devices interact with each other. So just for simplicity, we're calling device X1 and X2. So for instance, if I have a LG fridge and a Samsung TV and I need them both to interact with each other, it's not necessary that they can do it directly. You need certain connector devices. That means I need to add more devices for my two devices to be able to talk to each other. This could be the case if it is from the same company, but different devices, or it could be from different companies, different devices. So brand and material, I still require this. But if my appliance has a level of smartness enabled in it, which is what you see in certain products slowly emerging. For instance, our Alexas can do something, or our fridge or washing machine, which has a much higher hardware, is capable of doing something more. If they are loaded with a higher software capability, then we can try and eliminate some of these bridging layers. So all in all, what the communication aspect of things is all not that simple, but it's not all doom. It's also not impossible. So what's been happening is that there are consortiums being formed, particularly in the open standards, which are enabling innovation. So the case in point are two consortiums here. We have the Matter Consortium and the SunSpec Consortium. We have Matter Consortium, where the likes of the Apples and the Amazons and the Googles have come together, where they're actually talking about how devices can have a common communication standard which could be applied, which would then allow for any of the brands to seamlessly interact with each other. If you're wondering why anybody would want to do that, I think the bigger picture of what they see is to go beyond the devices and to look at the Internet of Things as a whole. So the focus is on how to leverage or new business models that could be developed when we look at the entire IoT platform and not supposed to just a particular appliances. So that is where they're heading. So Matter really looks at device level open standards being adopted by various brands, whereas SunSpec looks as common standards that could be adopted across DER technologies. So it could be your solar rooftop or a storage unit that you can keep on your premises. What we have not yet managed to do is to look at data standards, because that's something that's also very country specific based on their regulation, but we eventually like to do that. But what we realize is that bringing in this open standards is an enabler, and we try to map it across different stakeholders to see what could be, what is in it for them to be able to act upon something as intricate as this. So just a quick overview, not going to go into everything. These data is available for later to go through. But just from a consumer perspective, why should I or you as a consumer be even bothered about a discussion on open standards? Simply because it gives me as a consumer more choices. I'm not locked into any particular brand. Also, it gives me a better insight into how I use my own devices. So if I have an app on my phone telling me that my consumption pattern could be optimized because I personally prefer a lower consumption footprint, or that I am an active consumer and I would like to participate in the market, it could be anything. So you give consumers more power in their hand by having more smart appliances. What it essentially means for the consumer is they need to make some active choices. It will not happen just like that. That means they would have to make an effort to integrate smart home appliances into their home, which will come as a consequence of the market maturing, and also participate in demand response programs, which is usually initiated by the local utility. And in order to facilitate all this from a regulatory standpoint, first and foremost, what's required is consumer awareness. Because consumers need to become more aware about this possibility that they can be an active consumer to begin with. And then, of course, assure them that the data that they have is protected and will not be misused. So this is something that a lot of the advanced energy markets or electricity markets are already figuring out. And this is something that we also urge India can already get ahead of the curve and start doing. Likewise, for device manufacturers, as mentioned before, they can really focus on their core product enhancements and also focus on developing IoT platforms as opposed to spending money on the ICT layers, which could be common for any brand and across all devices. And in doing so, in enabling interoperable devices across brands, they get to explore other business models which they otherwise would not, which means we could have the likes of the LGs and the Samsungs and others entering the power sector through offering aggregators such as virtual power plants by aggregating their consumers who are using their devices, or offering an IoT platform per se, or even go to a much more mature business models, which is product as a service. That means you sort of price the product based on their usage as opposed to buying upfront the product. So many innovative business models can emerge in that space. Again, what would the active choice be for a device manufacturer? One is to start making smart devices. Hope the industry expert today can also throw some light on that. And of course, adopt open connectivity standards, which is a key enabler for all brands sort of converging towards a common point, which is heavily right now dominant with proprietary standards. Again, the regulatory enablers is for the regulatory and the policy force to sort of bring in open connectivity standards or acknowledge that we would like to go that way. In doing so, what it does is it creates a level playing field for both new and small companies. Otherwise, building a standard is a heavy, cost-intensive affair, which is usually then concentrated with the huge conglomerates or the big brands, whereas you don't have new product innovation being able to enter the market and offer something at a cost-effective rate. And so that could be a great thing. Lastly, for the power sector, I think it's clear that for as Laura also mentioned in a slide, there are many only upsides. What it gives is better visibility. First off, if you have smart devices, the utility gets a better visibility into how consumers are using. And in having that visibility, they're able to also have a much more reliable and run their grids much better. It also gives us more informed decision making on how DERs could be located across the grid, so that you have the right kind of infrastructure enhancement as and where required for wherever these DERs are coming in. Also, it gives you better billing efficiency, which is a challenge in many of the global southern countries. Again, of course, roll out demand response program. But two very important things that's of a very hot debate is it can also give utilities a better insights into power procurement and grid planning, I think, which is now done or more long-term, but going forward, the more visibility we have, the better we are able to negotiate the price of procuring that electricity, be it through the market or through contracts. And all of this, again, going back to reliability to the grid, which means better resource adequacy planning as well. Again, the choices that the power sector needs to make is to open and have open connectivity standards and build a communication system across the grids. That means through all the different layers. It's the consumer premises being able to interact seamlessly with the utility with the grid operators, and so on up until the market, so that we can have new ways of leveraging the benefit across the value chain. Regulatory enablers are again the same as everyone, because the power sector is sort of overarching. But something specific that can come out for consumer participation is, of course, time of use tariffs and aggregator models that could be brought into the power sector. So I think with this, I'll stop. And I think this is what I have to say. It's not going to be easy, but I think worth the challenge. Thank you. Back to you, Parul.
Thanks, Shweta. Thanks. Vimal, over to you. You can also share your screen.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentations. And actually, I have to thank Andre, Laura, and Shweta, because the three presentations were actually music to my ears, because you were all talking about standards, and that's actually the reason for my existence. So thank you very much. Let me just share a few quick slides. Okay, just give me a moment. Can you see my screen in full screen mode?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is just a few quick slides. And when I was invited by Shweta and Parul for this session, I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page when we talk of interoperability. And coming from IEC, which has been writing standards since 1906, and I could easily pick a bone with Shweta, don't take me wrong, on some of the things you mentioned about standards being too expensive and etc. But we can talk about that later on over a cup of coffee someday. IEC has been writing about, we've written about 35,000 standards involving actively about 20,000 experts from all over the world, which is, they're coming from about 170 countries. And even today, I can unhesitatingly say that all of us who are on the panel and the folks who are attending this session online or through Zoom today, all of you are actually using IEC standards, whether you recognize IEC or not. I can bet on that without even knowing which part of the world you are in. That's the power of standardization itself. But when we come to interoperability, I mean, I'm giving you an analogy, so that we don't get caught up in our electrical world of a simple old traditional car. Hundreds, if not thousands of components. Can any one component claim that I make the car run? Of course not. But all the components put together in a certain way, each one of them doing what they are meant to do, make sure that the car moves. The steering wheel cannot say, hey, it's because of me that you run. And the tires can't say that, the engine can't say that, the piston. Only when you put them together in a certain way, then things happen. Now let me extend this same question to an electrical network. In some ways, the picture is a smart network, but the diagram I'm showing here is a simple electrical network, just to demonstrate that had it not been for interoperability, each manufacturer, each substation, each piece of equipment could have been unique, literally making it impossible to just have substations come all over the world. Thanks to interoperability, we really have electricity coming into our homes, into our kitchens, into our living rooms, into our bedrooms, and in a safe, consistent manner. Today, nobody looks around where you buy your electrical appliances, be it a mobile phone or a television or a kitchen appliance. You just plug it in without even thinking what voltage there was. because somebody designed the standards around interoperability of voltages and do it in a safe, efficient manner. That's where interoperability comes in. Let me give you a practical example of what we did recently also. I'll come to that. As I mentioned, IC standards have been written since 1906. And one of the first ones was the electric bulb by Thomas Edison. Typically, every standard that we write has something known as normative references. It's the yellow box that you will see on your screen. What the normative references means, literally, if you put it in normal English language, it means which are the other standards from where you have to pull in information for this standard to actually work. So there are multiple standards which come together, not just one standard which can deliver a solution. This standard, which I'm showing on screen, is something I'm personally very proud of. It's about enabling electricity access in those homes where there has never been electricity ever. The first time they're even getting a light bulb. And in those homes, if you were to try and give just one simple light bulb, there is a whole set of standards which are already there in the background, which come in to make sure that that light bulb glows and it's a safe, repeatable, efficient system. This is a picture I took in 2014, and this is the example I wanted to conclude my presentation with. This picture is in a village in Maharashtra called Mukhara. It's about 150 kilometers east of Mumbai. This was in 2014 when I visited this village, more to see what does village life look like when there is no electricity whatsoever. 22 families, absolutely no electricity. And it's unfortunate that even in the 21st century, we had people just living by sunlight, cooking with firewood or kerosene, and their whole livelihood was just doing this basic thing. In 2017, thanks to a government grant, this gentleman got just one light bulb inside the hut. There was a small solar panel on the rooftop, a very small battery, a charge controller. And this changed his life. This was the first electricity access for this gentleman. And this is the standard I was showing in the previous slide that India was party to, bringing to the global community. Now, how do you make it interoperable? IC has many technical committees which work together, each one of them doing its own little piece. TC, don't get too caught up in the numbers and the jargon. And if you really need information, write to me and I'll be happy to bombard you with a lot of information. But typically there is a committee which does lighting components, another one which does batteries, another does electronics, another does connectors, another does cables, another does the solar wafers, and yet another does the solar panels itself, the assembly of the solar panels. When you put them together in a certain way, then magic happens and the light bulb works. That's really interoperability at work. And this is how IEC and its standards are contributing to our community. This I'm really proud of, because this is helping this old man come out of poverty, because the village had nothing. Now, just with one light bulb, he could move indoors, and he was making these bamboo baskets. He made about 40% more bamboo baskets per day, and he could sell them. The extra 40% bamboo baskets was pure profit, because the raw material was just bamboo, which was a local resource there. And this changed his life. Take a guess, what was the first thing he bought with the extra money? Let me answer that for you. It was not a second light bulb. It was not a kitchen appliance. He actually bought a mobile phone. Why? Because all the young people in the village had already moved to the cities. This was 22 families of only old people left in the village. And with the mobile phones, he was able to talk to his children and grandchildren practically every day. The mobile phone charging was actually just a USB port embedded into the charge controller. That's again interoperability for you. This is how lives have been changing. This is also about SDG 7 and how IEC standards are enabling SDG 7. I'll stop there. There's a lot to share, and I look forward to the Q&A. And I have many other slides which I've hidden right now, but I'll send these across to you so that you may share with all the delegates and the panelists here. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vimal. Thanks. Sridhar, over to you. A very important industry perspective.
Hi, Parul. Thank you. Thanks, FSR Global, for giving me this opportunity. Most of the speakers, previous to me, have covered most of the important topics, especially Shweta. She has covered like everything that I wanted to talk. I don't have much to talk now. Vimal, thanks a lot for showing that last slide. It relates a lot to my, previous life. I mean, 15 years back, when this Canadian scientist came to India. His name is Dr. Dave Irwin Halliday. He is the founder of first LED light bulb. And then he demonstrated to the world that LEDs can be used for, lighting in the homes. And since there was a contest, which said, oh, if somebody can drive this LED efficiently, they'll be taken to Himalayas for a trek. So that excited me. And then, I designed some electronics for Dave. And since then, I've been associated with him. There was a National Geographic, video shot, and then a lot of awards won by Dr. Dave. That brought back all these memories. Thanks a lot. Coming to the current topic, I would like to share, I in fact made small changes to this slideshow based on what other speakers spoke. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
So I'll give a bit of introduction about Blaze automation, and then I'll get into the topic of interest today. Blaze basically does IoT solutions, which finally helps end users, utilities to achieve what they want. For end users, they don't have to use multiple applications to deal with multiple devices. That's what we give to the end users. Whereas for the utilities, we help them understand how the energy flow is being happening in the home and how they can plan for demand response programs. And for VPPs, we provide insights into what's happening in the home with regard to consumption and also generation, as well as battery backups or any other backups that they have at the home. We help global brands achieve their end goals with regard to IoTization and then enabling smart grids. Coming to today's topic, interoperability. This is very much related to what I do every day from the past, what I've been doing for the past 17 years. There are three angles to let you all know about the real need for interoperability. As Andrea mentioned, most of the consumers are now prosumers. In simple terms, 10 years back, or even now in India, most of us are consumers. What it means is grid is supplying us electricity and then we are all consuming it. But whoever has solar panels on the top of their rooftop, they are not just consumers, they are prosumers. what it means is they are not only consuming, but they're also generating electricity, which is producing electricity, which is sent back to the grid. So that's how the name prosumers has come into picture. Prosumers these days have a lot of challenges. Like one challenge is, not all prosumers have these challenges, but some prosumers who are sustainable centric has these issues. In order to have complete control over their home or electricity consumption or generation, they don't have tools and mechanisms. One simple example I can give you is, like, for example, with lot of interest, you have acquired or purchased a solar panel system and you have deployed on your rooftop, but you are out of your home most of the mornings and then you are coming back in the evening. That's when you actually need electricity usage. Like in the afternoon, solar generation is a lot. Unfortunately, you are not able to exploit or use the solar energy that you are generating unless you have a battery. Even if you have a battery, there is certain capacity limitation to the battery. Like you can only store certain amount of energy. In case if you want to run your air conditioning system or geysers or any other high power consuming systems, you really don't have that kind of a battery backup. What you're doing in turn is the solar generated in the afternoon times is again pushed back to the grid, and you are anyhow getting it back, or you're consuming from the grid um, whenever there is a need for you, that too in the evening times. So this might sound pretty straightforward, and there's no thinking that you need to do in this perspective. But as a homeowner or a prosumer, the intent of buying solar panel is you want to reduce your electricity cost and then go green. But if you look at the incentives that you get whenever you're generating and sending back to the grid, you probably get 20 to 30% of the cost that you pay to grid while you're consuming in the evening times. This is Indian context. If you look at the global context, maybe Australia or Japan, every kilowatt hour of energy that you consume, probably you're paying about anything starting from 30 cents to 60 cents, depending on the time of use. And whenever you're generating energy, when you send it back to the grid, you're only getting 3 years back, the situation was good. You're getting about 15, 20 cents. Now the situation is so bad that you get only like 5 to 10 cents at the max. What this is doing is your return on investment period on solar is actually going very, very high. Probably even in 30 to 40 years, you will never be able to recover the investments that you are making through the savings that you are achieving by this. So these are the problems of prosumers. Apart from this, there are other things that we can discuss on a later date. Coming to the utilities, if I have to ask whether the utilities are happy or unhappy with end consumers installing solar panels, I would say the opinion will be mixed, because of the advent of solar panels and EV chargers. Grid has become very unpredictable because there is no demand forecasting. I mean, previously utilities used to forecast demand based on regular consumption trends from the end users, and then they used to purchase energy and then distribute it to the homes. Whereas now, with change in weather, solar panels will generate less, and then utilities don't know what to do with the excess energy. And when electric vehicles are increased in the homes, then the charging is actually putting a lot of burden on the utility infrastructure. Utilities are not planned to handle solar and electric vehicles in the past 10-15 years. So in the future, it's going to create much more chaos. Power quality is an issue. Handling unpredicted consumption generation patterns is an issue, which will lead to a lot of uncertainties to the utility industry. So that's the utility perspective. Why, I mean, there's a problem that they're also facing. And consumer brands are also having some sort of a issue here, like where, let's say, you're a consumer brand and then you release a product. Probably your consumer brand, let's say brand A, is capable of releasing 2 or 3 products, and then brand B releases 4 or 5 products, and brand C releases some other 4 products. Like a geyser is from brand one, refrigerator is from brand two, and then washing machine is from brand three. When it comes to the end user, his expectation is, in order to make them all smart, why do I need to use multiple mobile applications or multiple interfaces? They're expecting all these in one particular mobile application or interface. So consumer brands are trying to impress customers by integrating additional brands or additional protocols into them, so that they can provide some sort of interoperability and then customer satisfaction. So these 3 players in the market are pushing a lot for interoperability for their own advantages. So that's what I feel is the real need in the market for interoperability. Coming to the global existence, it's not that interoperability is not existing in the market from the past decade or two. It is there, but it is not well understood or well utilized or well enforced by the governments or the regulatory authorities. Here are some of the examples of global existence of interoperability. DRED stands for Demand Response Enabled Device. In Australia and New Zealand market, you see a lot of air conditioning systems, hot water systems, pool cleaners, or solar inverters and wind generators. They're all DRED enabled. What it means is, if utility wants to perform any demand response activity, there is an interface on these end white goods or consumer electronic devices where the utility can directly interact and perform demand response activities. Though DRED standard is defined way back in 2004, 2005, most of the appliance vendors are enforced to use this in the market, whereas the intent is utilities will get benefited out of it, users will get benefited out of utilities demand response programs and all of that. Whereas based on my observation and also industry's observation, it is poorly being enforced on the appliance manufacturers. If you literally go and look at the DRED devices that are installed, 30, 40 plus million devices that are already installed in the market, none of them has a proper interface to directly get connected to the utility. So this DRED is a good example of a standard that's existing, but poorly enforced with very limited features. Another noteworthy standard for us to look at is EcoNet, Energy Conservation Home Network. EcoNet stands for Energy Conservation Home Network. It's a very Japanese specific standard, widely adopted by a lot of Japanese brands. Most companies that manufacture air conditioners or refrigerators or any other HVAC systems or water heaters, including some small appliances or devices like light bulbs, they have adopted EcoNet widely, and over 100 plus million devices are existing in Japanese market, which talk to each other and also talk to the grid. One simple example I can give you is, let's say if you're not at home, if your solar is generating a lot of energy, instead of sending that energy back to the grid, if you're not getting good tariff from the grid or good rate from the grid for the energy that you're generating, you can instead use that to preheat or pre-cool your home, or heat your water before you come to home, or run the dishwasher or washing machine automatically with the help of that excess energy. So this way, your return on investment will significantly increase, and thereby, you're automating your devices. So Econet standard is like a very good one, which is very well organized, adopted, enforced by the Japanese government, and I really like this standard. What this lacks, based on my understanding, is security and the um, globalization, which matter standard is planning to achieve. A lot of the third standard, which is actually a protocol, is being adopted by a lot of new generation companies, and industry majors like Apple, Amazon, Google, Samsung, Schneider Electric are all pushing this standard across the globe. This is new generation, highly secure. More players are registered with this, but the only lacuna here is number of device types that are part of this standard. I'm sure in the future, Matter Consortium will look into including more device types so that it forms a comprehensive network of energy meters, distributed energy resources, and appliances, so that all these things can be, interoperable to give benefit to individual players here. Coming to a roadmap suggestion from my side, uh, in order to enforce the adoption of interoperability at all levels, regulatory authorities should gear up and then start imposing standards onto appliance manufacturers. It's not just for the benefit of appliance manufacturers, but also for the benefit of end users and utilities. Utilities are going to have very tough time in the future. As I said, with more and more distributed energy resources being plugged into the grid, um, grid stability is at a huge stake. So utilities are, the next parties who should gear up, start, looking into these standards, adopt tokenization, and implement blockchains so that they can make these energy transactions more safe and secure. For the consumer brands, with the advent of these standards and regulations by the authorities, they will be enforced definitely to incorporate these systems into their devices. If you have to maintain, if the consumer brands have to maintain their own platform, IoT platform or any other platform to handle all these devices, it's going to be a big challenge. Like interoperability doesn't come just like that. It's a costly affair. So whoever is maintaining the mobile applications or voice assistants or the platforms, if you can make the devices compatible to a specific standard like a Matter or Econet, then one or two big brands who is handling all these standards will take up from there, and then end consumers, utilities, and all the players will get equal benefit out of all of this. So that's what I would like to talk today.
Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you so much. So I think we got a wide spectrum of interesting insights from all the panelists. And so what I would like to do for the next few minutes now is to kind of go back to some of the points that were raised by the panelists. And also, please feel free, within the panelists, if you want to interject, react, or comment on something that has already been said. And then we'll move to the question and answers that have been shared. So just going back to Andre first. So Andre, thank you, for all the comments that you made, very insightful. I think one aspect that I wanted to, kind of discuss with you is the fact that, you work with a UN organization, so at an intergovernmental level, and you made a point where you were talking about this bidirectional flow of data and energy. And I think that kind of fits perfectly with what we're talking right now. So just going back to that, even though I know that data in itself can be like, we can have a whole other session on just data, but just to shed some light on the governance of data from an intergovernmental level. And the second point that you raised was, talking about funding, which also Sridhar, during the end of his presentation right now, again spoke. So, just to give us some insight of any work that has already been done, is being done, something that you'd like to share with all of us.
Sure. Thank you very much. Very good questions and challenging ones. So on data, I think it varies. The context varies a lot on geography. So we have very different starting points and very different contexts. Nevertheless, something that we could see across geographies is something related to legacy systems. So basically data that we don't have from the past, or we have at best scattered data from the past of our energy systems. And solutions to that have limits, like synthetic data and all that have some sort of limits. But we are trying somehow to solve that and to somehow fill in the gaps by, let's say, importing, if you want, some data that we have from other geographies to similar ones. That is an option that some researchers are looking into. But as I said, at best we have scattered data even for the current, let's say, functioning of the energy systems, and that's not a very good thing. Also because of standards, and also because of data in itself is not interoperable, if you want, in the sense that some systems are producing or acquiring data in some formats, some others are acquiring in a different format, and therefore we don't have, let's say, matching of protocols when it comes to data. And I think that's a pity, and that I think connects pretty well with what Laura was mentioning on the fact that nothing is new. So data, we've been working with data for decades, in various sectors. In marketing, if you want, it's probably the sector in which we kind of, elevated data to the importance that it is today. So it's not something new. It's just a matter of how standards would bring data together, who will own that, and that's the whole discussion about governance. Who will curate data and who owns it and who protects data in that sense. And I think we are kind of slowly getting into a, let's say, better shape, and some sort of conversations are being held, especially in geographies that have let's say, focused on standards as one of the key priorities, like the EU, and we've been looking into that both on data and some other, let's say, hardware. So some conversations are going ahead, but probably not at the right, let's say, pace, the pace that would, once again, as I mentioned at the beginning, unlock, let's say, system efficiency and efficiency as a whole. And final point on data, I think data is also something that is related to standards in, let's say, assets related or businesses that are having very different protocols. So, of course, we are talking about, or they are talking about, mostly about the fact that, in some sense, and there is this school of thought that standards will probably hinder competition and therefore innovation and so on and so forth. So we kind of need to have, not necessarily a free market on technologies, on types of technologies, but rather some sort of more standards than just one. It's their argument. I understand it, not necessarily agree with that, but that's not the only thing that businesses would like to protect. And I'm not saying that in a negative, let's say, way, but it's also the data that they are acquiring through their protocols, that is protected from the data that other companies or other businesses through other protocols are acquiring. So once again, it goes back to data and how we share that, how we govern that, how we make, different data pools communicate with each other in at least to some extent that would unlock system efficiency. And final point on funding, which I think it's critical, and it's if you want, a never-ending, let's say, conversation, both on the energy transition side and the digital side, and the two combined, obviously. So we are seeing different, let's say, options that are flowing somehow in the energy transition objectives and also through digital. But I wouldn't say that, once again, it depends on geographies, but I wouldn't say that we are seeing that in an organized, let's say, fashion. one of the reasons is that digitalization is a cross-cutting, let's say, subject, and therefore it's pretty difficult to pick a specific, let's say, funding opportunity to fund. It's something holistic and needs to go holistic at the same time. That's true. But I think most of the reasons why there are some issues with the funding is also because the awareness of some policymakers, some decision makers, is not necessarily where it should be, and or the reluctance on going full speed on digital tools, digital technologies, smart technologies is also something that it kind of hinders a bit the adoption, and therefore channeling or mobilizing finance where it should be at the pace that it should be. But I'm sure my colleagues have some ideas on that as well. So I'll close it here for the moment.
Sure. Thanks, Andre. I think drawing from what you just said, I'd like to bring in Laura. So, we've been talking about the policymaker perspective, and Laura, you yourself spoke about regulatory leadership, and just not limited to the funding aspect, but also you made a very important point talking about digital skills, the lack of digital skills specifically in the energy sector. So if you could draw upon some of the experience from either from within the UK or your work with IEA, we'd be happy to, kind of know a bit more on that.
So it is a sort of culture change for the energy sector. They absolutely wonderful engineers and wonderful economists, and then they come up against digital natives, and the culture issue is really, really quite complicated, because one is the engineer wants to know that everything is going to be in place for 20 years and is tested to destruction, whereas the digital native is looking at an evolutionary, dynamic system design, and they're very, very different animals. The problem with it also is that the funding that goes to some of the utilities is very much infrastructure heavy rather than data and digitalization enabled. And one of the other problems that I have had is that you talk to some of the utilities and you say, what about your digitalization strategy or whatever it is? And they say, oh yeah, no, we've got a fabulous guy who rolled out Microsoft Word across the company. So I wonder whether they would be useful in this space, right? And you say to yourself, okay, fine, there is a lot of education that is needed. So we have two different worlds coming together. And the problem is that what we're getting is a lot of people starting to skill up in digitalization. And what they're doing is they're digitalizing or digitizing their current processes. Now, digitalization is actually a transformation of how you do things. It is not just an enabler. And if we are going to be dealing in not such a distant future with millions of assets sitting in people's homes, in people's businesses, the idea that you are just going to be able to electronically do what you do today better, yes, a little step, but your system will collapse. Your utility will collapse. So there is no way that you can just layer this on. You have to look through your whole processes and digitalize them. But on the regulatory leadership side, one of the things that we were quite pleased with our digitalization task force was actually Ofgem, our regulator in the UK, absolutely lent into this. They have got, I think, one of the best digital regulatory teams that I have seen. And what we proposed, and was quite sort of taken aback, that they absolutely embraced, was that picking up on Andrea's point about data, is they said to the core. So I think we've been talking about appliances, right? And that's absolutely crucial. And we've got PAS, 1878, which I'm sure Vimal is attuned with, which is a digital interoperability platform. I chair the British Standards Institute's Net Zero Committee. You know, we're really, really into those units. But it's the layer above that can, A is more regulated, right? So actually regulators have agency to make a change. But also if they are in many ways, if they're enforced to digitalize, to ensure that their data is presumed open, and that's what we got government to do in the UK, is all networks and utilities, their data is presumed open. Now, there are reasons to close data, but they had to start from the open data proposition, and they have to justify why their data is closed. If you create that layer of openness and that layer of digitalization, they were also enforced to have digitalization strategies. Then the appliances have an interlocutor. If what you do is you make all these fabulous appliances interoperable, but there is no interface, you know, Sidur's point about there's no market then. There is no connection opportunity. There is no, in many ways, time of use. So I think the appliances are really important. We don't need to do them, you know, in sequence. We can do them together, but we must get that layer of utility interface that actually enables that. And
Completely agree.
very quickly up on the IEA side, the IEA is looking at creating global standards by which all these fab and exciting appliances can start to interact, access markets, and access capability of the networks.
Completely agree with you, Laura. I think when Shweta was highlighting the benefits aspect of the power sector, which we've covered somewhat in our paper as well, that specific layer, you know, until that is there, that the bridge between appliances, interoperable appliances, and how that kind of links with the smart grid ecosystem and the utilities, I think we won't be able to unlock all potential benefits until that gap is filled. I think, Vimal, you wanted to...
Yes.
Please come in. Yeah.
Thank you. Laura, excellent points. I totally echo all that you mentioned. May I give an additional perspective what I am seeing? And I you know, in my position, a lot of what I do is actually sitting at the cusp of the challenge that you mentioned, you know, the electrical world and the data world. Somewhere are they clashing, overlapping, collaborating, and what's going on? My perspective, and I must say, is a very positive one. In IEC itself, we started a kind of a digital transformation journey about 5 years back. And today, we've brought about a big change in the way we are writing standards through online collaboration. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But also, I think what has helped IEC in this perspective is we have a lot of very geekish, you know, drill down, siloed engineers who are experts at one specific component in the entire electrical supply chain. And they are the best in the world at that. But how do you transform them? And I think I don't take credit for being too smart, but one good thing that we have done in IEC is actually not see it as a digital transformation initiative, but see it as a change management initiative. That has really helped us. And answering a basic fundamental question for all stakeholders saying, what's in it for me? When I'm able to answer that question, be it somebody who's just a manufacturer of switches, a small company, and just wanting to go and sell switches and make some profit at end of the year, to a large multinational having operations in 200 countries. If I can answer these kind of questions for all, I see that coin dropping. And this is one reason I think in IEC, we are finding a lot of takers for the kind of digital transformation that is going on. In fact, it's interesting you are associated with IEA, because IEA and IEC have a strategic partnership at the global level, and we are taking a lot of IEA's initiatives and inputs for further writing standards for the emerging digitalization. Just a quick plug-in, if you just do a Google search for all electric and connected society, IEC has this as a specific goal, where we are creating a complete set of global standards for taking the entire infrastructure of the world from whatever status it is to a totally smart infrastructure, in a way having a layer of communication capabilities and then some kind of data analytics or smarts on top, so that the data generated through the electrical generation, transmission, distribution, and consumption is leading to some kind of value added service for the society. Just do a Google search and I'm sure you'll find it. I'll also find a link and post it here.
Sure. Thanks,
Thank
Vimal.
you.
Laura, before I think you wanted to react, but before we go there briefly, I just want to insert a question here from the audience. Due to paucity of time, I think let's just include it between our discussions. So there's a question asking, kindly throw some insights on international experience on implementation of common information model in EMS in power system, its success and challenges, as Indian system is struggling every time the systems are being upgraded by the vendors. I leave it open. Andre, Laura, Vimal, any of you, please.
Sorry, I keep
Yeah, go ahead.
jumping in because
No,
you're
no,
all
no.
talking about standards. So do excuse
No,
me.
please.
The idea is not to hog the time here.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting. This whole model, there is a standard also around this. It originated somewhere in the German industry, and DKE, VDE have been taking this global, and it has now been adopted worldwide. So it's a fairly standard protocol. The challenge is not necessarily the SIM protocol. The challenge is, and I've seen this issue not only in India, but in many countries across the world, that we think that sitting in India, and sorry, for a moment, I'm putting on my India hat, that the global community already knows our problem, so they will take care of whatever we need. The challenge is, if India does not participate in the design of the SIM model or contribute to the discussion or challenge whatever is being presented by saying, okay, here is an Indian expert's perspective, then it is wrong to assume that whatever is developed in the SIM or like SIM in any other standard, that is the right thing for us. We have challenges many times in implementation, not only of this, but in many other standards, primarily because our stakeholders, be it manufacturers, installers, or regulators, research institutes, they may not be participating in the process of developing standards. But when the standard is out and published and available for the global community, then we stand up and say, hey, sorry, this doesn't work for us because this is not the right thing. And this is not just an India problem. I see this across the board. So my only message is, if you want the standard to work for you, please wake up, get your voice heard, get your voice to the table. If you get it to the table, I can bet it will be addressed. And that's the time when you fix the standard so that the implementation will work. If you don't fix the standard in the beginning, then it's a question mark on the implementation. Thank you.
Completely agree, Vimal. I think that was something which Shweta and I also had in mind when we were working on the paper. Shweta, would you like to come in and kind of comment on what Vimal just suggested?
Yes, I think completely agree with what both Laura and Vimal did flag. I think you need to be part of the process from the get-go. As I understand, Vimal, when we were discussing also, even with open standards, I think all of these entities or associations need to interact with the main bodies from the get-go so that it has a much more geographical uptake or recognition per se, so that it's not happening in parallel. Then the question comes as to which standards to go take if there are 4 different good standards. I think that's what happened when EVs rolled out in India. We had 3 different standards, and so every charging station had to look at the different plugins, and that sort of, I think, complicated the rollout process when we're looking at charging infrastructure in India. But just to pull back a little and ask this question to any of the panelists, actually. With geographies like India, there are multiple problems we are solving at any given point of time. And when we had asked the utilities on how they would prioritize or uptake smart grid implementation within their utilities, there is always a limited funding budget. So where should one start? Like, what should be the minimum things in place to sort of scale up? We had through our processes with some of them over the last couple of years, we did provide the European JRC's CBA, the cost benefit analysis, and the scalability replicability toolkit to help make these assessments. But what has been sort of the development pathway in other countries that India could probably pick up and learn?
Laura, do you want to?
Is that a question? Sorry. Yes, absolutely, Shweta. I mean, I think from what I understand, and this is not trying to talk too much about the UK, but apparently from third parties, the UK has got the best strategic approach, right? i.e. picking up on all the different elements that need to work together. But actually, when it comes to implementation, I would say that Australia has developed some really interesting grid management services. And Australia is quite interesting because in some ways, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it is the case, that they had a crisis. And sometimes a crisis is a huge opportunity. And so I would say that they have probably developed the most effective model, and it's being implemented in terms of grid management. And that is because they have too much solar. Now, you are in exactly the same situation where that hockey stick of solar deployment, I would see, is going to become a massive, massive problem. So how did they utilize that? So there, I would say that they're probably in the best space. Strangely enough, or maybe not, the best place for standardizing the energy efficiency and also, I think, moving to the interoperability of appliances is Ghana. And again, Ghana has got some of the best standards actually across the board. They're real leadership in standards. But again, they had a crisis. They had a major energy crisis. And by putting energy efficiency, which also helps in some ways balance the system, they have reduced total energy consumption across the country by 6 to 7%. Now, that is absolutely massive. Then if you look at certain other markets, I think the EU is doing some extraordinary work on data sharing, in many ways, not so much data governance, but digital twin linkages. And so I think they're really, really important. And again, they're using some exciting standards. When it comes to digital standards, I think, Vimal will have a much better view on this, but I do think the PAS is 1878 is useful. I think the ISO is taking up quite a lot of that, and the EU is looking at it. So I think that everybody is moving forward at different speeds. The awful thing is that on the whole, the acceleration comes when there's been a major crisis. So let's try not to get there.
To that point, right? Thank you, Laura. Sorry, so I'm going to quickly go back to Sridhar before I ask you all to give a final concluding remark. Sridhar, I think there's a question for you asking on DREAD if it comes under ADR, and can you kindly give any reference number of penetration appliance category wise?
I'm just planning to type the answer, but I can respond here.
Yeah.
So ADR stands for Automated Demand Response, as I understand. DREAD is an enabler for ADR. Yeah, it is right. DREAD stands for Demand Response Enabled Device, whereas with this kind of a device deployed in the home, ADR is possible by the utilities. If I have to give some reference about the penetration, I'm just Googling for that. I don't have right information about this at this point of time. Most of the brands selling either HVAC systems like air conditioners, cooling systems, or heating and ventilation systems, water heaters, pool pumps, inverters are mandated by Australian government that they should have DREAD interface. So I'm sure the number of appliances that are sold in the past 15, 20 years will definitely have this kind of an interface. Having said that, you cannot build a business on the top of DREAD. I mean, we have done extensive work on this. What we understood is there is a physical port, but you need to add a lot of electronics on the top of it to enable it. And most of the end customers are not even aware what a DREAD interface means, and they won't let you touch those, gadgets or electronic appliances. So please don't bank on that and then start building something compatible with DREAD. It won't fly.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sridhar. So I'm sure we all have a lot more to say. I certainly have a lot more to ask, but unfortunately, we do not have enough time. So I'm going to quickly ask you all to just probably limit it to one line concluding remarks, if I may. Andre, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick point on Laura's remarks, and I fully agree with that. It's a very much policy-driven, let's say, transformation that we are looking at. But at the same time, in order to support the massive, let's say, excitement that customers and consumers have, we also need to support the bottom-up approach. And standards and interoperability helps that in getting consumers from the lazy and passiveness state that we are all living in to a more active, let's say, role. Yeah.
Thank you. Laura?
I would say that actually consumers shouldn't necessarily need to engage with the energy system. I think it can all be done in an automated way, and they can in many ways liberate themselves from becoming electrical engineers, which is what the energy sector would love them to become. But I do think that they will get very frustrated if they cannot have the same digital experience that they have in every other sector. If the energy sector looks so old-fashioned and so behind the curve, they will get very frustrated and they'll force us all to digitalize.
Thank you, Laura. Vimal?
Thank you. Very quickly, 3 quick points. One, open standards. Just a word of caution, there is no free lunch. So if somebody is offering you open standards, just wonder, and I don't say question, but just think about, why is somebody giving you something for free? What's in it for them? What's in it for you? Second quick point, there was some comment made about the cost of standards and developing standards or deploying standards. Imagine the cost to the world if there were no standards. That is going to be hugely more than the cost of actually having a standard. And the third, on implementation, to the question which was written, participate, participate, participate. You want great standards, a great society, great implementation, excellent smarts, great digitalization, participate. There is no better solution and nothing simpler than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Shweta?
I think all the points are taken, but I'll just echo. I think, not just consumer awareness. What's important, at least in countries like India, is also the power sector professional awareness, because a lot of them are still not fully well versed with the nomenclatures of how people are talking about digitalization, and not just digitization, as Laura did point out. And of course, participate after becoming empowered with that knowledge. Two takeaways for us to further within the Indian power sector.
Thank you. Sridhar.
My recommendations to the power sector in India is to invest on infrastructure without, being very careful about their investments on smart meters or, edge computing gateways or something like that in the homes, so that they can provide meaningful insights at the home level or at the, premises level, maybe an office or a factory. That will help them get meaningful insights, and from there they can build on the top of it and, become interoperable in the future.
Thank you so much. So thank you. We're already a bit over time, but thank you so much to all the participants for joining us. We hope, even if we couldn't leave you with all the answers, we left you with something to think about and probably a lot more questions, which is always a good thing. Also, thank you so much to all the panelists for taking time out and joining us. Also, I would like to remind everyone here that the next session of the series would be on the 19th of February. And we would be posting more details on that on the FSR Global website and social handles. So please join us for the next event as well. And thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.